Make sure you listen to my daddy's podcast right now. Is it best show in the world?
And this is the Cards Face Up podcast. I am your host, Mr. Ty Hill. Today I have a special guest. He's a journalist for the Baltimore Sun. He's the author of We Own the City, which is a novel about the gun trace task force corruption scandal in Baltimore City. He calls it a true story of crime, cops, and corruption. Mr. Justin Fenton, how are you, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me, Ty. Appreciate it.
Man, look, I want to say thank you for coming, first of all. It means a lot to us, to my guests, and I think even though we are getting played everywhere across the world, Baltimore is my home. That's a special part of me. So it's very important to bring on people that's actually speaking for my community, and I love that about what you're doing with this book, We Own the City. So I want to jump right into it. For those that do not know or understand what I meant by the gun task force corruption, the gun trace task force corruption whole ordeal going on. Okay, we're going to run it down. The gun trace task force investigation in 2017, 8 members of gun trace task force, which also goes by GTTF, a unit within a Baltimore City Police Department, BPD, were indicted and arrested on charges of racketeering, robbery, extortion, overtime fraud, and selling drugs seized during the operations. All 8 members of the task force have been sentenced to federal prison time. So this is a real story. It led to over 800 cases being overturned or dropped, and it's a big story in Baltimore, so I know all of y'all are familiar. I want to run down real quick just exactly what that federal time looks like for these officers right now. Wayne Jenkins, 25 years. Maurice Ward, 7 years. Hendricks, 7 years. Marcus Taylor, 18 years. Ram, 12 years. Gondo, 10 years. Allers, 15 years. And Herschel, 18 years. You chose to start your book off, and it kind of surrounded, it kind of spoke, it was really surrounding Lieutenant Wayne Jenkins. Why did you choose that? Tell me exactly who Wayne Jenkins is and his importance.
Yeah, Jenkins was the leader of the group at the time they got busted. He was seen as, within the police department, they thought he was like one of their best guys. They thought he was one of the best at getting guns at a time when officers maybe were pulling back after the Freddie Gray case and the uprising and the charges. Jenkins was one of those guys who was telling his bosses, we're going out there every night and we're doing our best, and we're, going to get as many guns as we can off the street. And, obviously, as it turned out, he was one of their worst officers. He was dealing drugs. He was robbing people. He was really directing what these officers were doing. And, in looking out at you have 8 officers charged. It's actually grown now to 14 or 15 since. But at the time, how do you focus in? How do you tell people a story they can follow? And I chose Jenkins because, again, of that duality of the praise and the criminality. And I sort of tried to trace his career. He started in 2003. I tried to trace his career along with all the different things going on in the BPD throughout those years. So you have zero tolerance. You have the focus on, so-called repeat violent offenders where they're bringing down the arrests. And he went through all that. So I could tell the story of the police department through Jenkins' story.
Got you. So, wow, you said it's up to 14 people right now. So that's deep. And of course, in my opinion, do you believe it's a lot more?
I think one of the things, I think an interesting thing about this case was that I think it shows that the corruption is maybe worse than we thought it was. I think what the guys who were doing it was doing is worse than we thought. But I also don't think it's quite as widespread as people think either. I think the feds have really tried to follow different leads and get people to flip and cooperate. And they have been bringing additional charges, but it's not like they've charged the entire force. But I do think there's probably a lot of uncharged people who they just couldn't build a case on who are still out there, unfortunately. Yeah.
Got you. One of the things that I found real funny, and I read your whole book, so congrats on making a great piece of material to read. And I encourage all of my listeners and subscribers to make sure you go out there and read it, listen. It's however you choose to get it, go ahead and get it, because it's a wonderful piece of information, especially being that I'm from here and I've seen the stuff go down firsthand because, of course, it's our local news. But the book put a lot of things into play for me. And I read all the way, I think it was 24 chapters?
I don't even know, actually.
It's a lot of damn chapters. It's a lot of chapters. I read all the way through, man, and I love how you touched on certain things. But one of the funniest things that I think you said on there was when you mentioned the knockers and the jump out boys. That was dope to me because not necessarily the knockers and jump out boys being dope, but the fact that it was your first time hearing that. You didn't know anything about knockers, and you're born from here. You were born here.
I knew about them, yeah, because as soon as I started covering the police department, that was one of the people were always complaining about the knockers and the jump out boys, and that's something that's been going on for decades here. Yeah.
You touched on that. Well, it wasn't you per se, but a lot of people did not know what knockers was.
Yes, I definitely had to explain it for the wider audience. I wanted to make sure that, I didn't want to take for granted that people would know what that was. So you have to sort of walk it out and explain that, because some of these things are like sort of a Baltimore thing. I'm sure they have them in other cities, but not everywhere, and definitely not places where people aren't aware of how police and the Black community interact.
Got you. And for those that don't know, knockers and jump out boys is basically plainclothes cops. They come through. It's been known that they whoop your ass, whatever it is, if you run. It's been known to the public humiliation was one of the big things, and you touched on it for a second. And I would have loved to hear more about it, but I think those are the things that, to constantly, the more people become aware of these things, the more times it'll be reported. But you touched on it for a brief second inside of the book as far as the public humiliation. Like, for those in Baltimore, you've seen the knockers come around, jump out. They got you strip searching you in the middle of the street, got your dick all out and all things of sort, in front of the public, in front of, it's humiliation. And those things are some of the things that I thought was important to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing about the case is that, like, the officers, so a lot of times you get like one officer at a time getting busted. You get one officer charged for like excessive force, one officer charged maybe for even dealing drugs or stealing money. And they always sort of explain them away as like bad apples. And here you had people for years have been complaining about these officers. It's usually not on tape. The cell phone cameras, body cameras are a relatively new thing. So we have that. And then the officers, most of the officers flipped and said, yeah, this is what we do. And they sat on the witness stand and said, we would drive at groups of people really fast and slam on the brakes and pop open our doors. And if anybody ran, that's who we went after. And to hear them sort of verbalize that and admit it, I think, it's something that hasn't really happened. And I know residents have been saying it for a long time, but officers, so there's always this defense mechanism where they're like, well, this is what we're supposed to do. And we didn't do that, or we didn't do what he says we did. And the officers took the stand and said, no, that's what we do. We try to stop as many people on a night as we can to increase our chances of finding something, even if we don't have cause to do it.
Got you. And I love it. But you being what they would consider today a whistleblower, how's that for you? How does that work with your regular life? Is it a scary time? Because, I mean, we listen to stories, and this is not just being from this community of things of sort. We listen to even testimonies inside of your book of people saying that they're suffering from post-traumatic, from experiences that they've had with Baltimore City Police. How does it work for you? You reporting this and you're uncovering a lot of things to the eye that has never known none of this existed. Not by fault, I'm going to say, because some people are blinded just to their world and they didn't see a lot of this stuff going on, but you're actually in the Black communities and you're seeing it going on. How does that feel to be that whistleblower? Is it kind of you're watching over your shoulder, you're paranoid about it? Like,
yeah, I mean, as I was, I can't take credit for uncovering this case. The feds uncovered it through a wiretap investigation. Really, it started with a county suburban drug investigation. There's some neighboring counties and their detectives were trying to, stop drugs coming into their community, and they stumbled onto this. And then the FBI did a wiretap. So, when the officers were charged, I try to tell people that, at the Baltimore Sun, we cover a lot of different aspects of the criminal justice system. We tend to cover homicides. People losing their life is an important thing. I've done, exposés on flawed rape investigations. We cover what's going on in different communities, policies, laws, court cases. And these drug officers was not an area of the department that I had really covered that much because, we don't cover, someone getting arrested with a bag of weed or bag of, whatever, or a handgun. Those tend to be the stories that make the news. We'd heard about some of these officers. Daniel Herschel, for example, had been covered a lot. He'd been put on blast by Young Moose, by one of our reporters who did a story on officers with repeat lawsuits. So he was no stranger to public attention. But for the most part, these guys were kind of, working in the shadows, because that's what the department wants them to do. They want them to ride around these unmarked cars, not in uniform, and do traffic stops and get guns. But as I was trying to peel away the layers of the onion and try to get more information, it was an uncomfortable thing, because again, I do think there are people who are uncharged, who probably fear getting charged, and I'm trying to expose them. So there was it's an uncomfortable thing. I'm also kind of hamstrung because people can tell me that someone did something. It doesn't mean I can necessarily report it. There's legal issues there with accusing someone of a crime when you can't prove it. But I was definitely wading into those waters during this process, and it was uncomfortable.
I can imagine. But like you said, it needs to be done. It's some of the things that needs to be done, and I think that's our civic duty to actually do those things. And especially with you being a part of such a big production as far as the Baltimore Sun, the radio and things of other, a lot of things work on request. Does the Baltimore Sun work like that? Does your job as a reporter, even if it wasn't for the Baltimore Sun, do you think that this topic is requested enough to actually, is it spoken about enough inside of the newspaper, because I don't see it a lot. I mean, we saw this and it kind of quickly disappeared, and it didn't show a lot more. It wasn't a lot of articles, because again, you just said that you peeled the layers of the onion back. This can go on. This could literally be in every publication every week, Yes. And do you feel as though other reporters are actually reporting this type of news, or are they not doing it out of fear and things of sort?
I think it's a natural thing for stories to go away, just like sort of run their course, when there's not, when it's not apparent that there's something more to do, they can fall away. I happen to think that, I have been writing a lot of stories about it regularly. In fact, I was worried about being accused of continuing to write it to prop up the book. You know what I mean? But honestly, the story is not over. There is still stuff going on. There is still people getting charged. There is still accusations and lawsuits. And, the bail bondsman accomplice who helped Wayne Jenkins steal drugs, and he just got out of prison. And I sat down with him, and he told me more information. He showed me more pictures. He showed me a letter that Jenkins wrote him from jail. There's an internal review of the case that's being conducted by a former inspector general of the Justice Department, and he hasn't even filed his report yet. It's going to come out probably in the fall. So, I mean, the story's still going. Do I think there are aspects of it that should be covered more? I think that there's crimes that haven't been uncovered or charged. But the challenge there is how do you uncover them? How do you prove it? I have suspicions about certain things, but again, I can, it's not what there's that line of Denzel Washington in Training Day. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And if I can't prove that he did these things, or I don't have someone making that accusation sort of on the record, my hands are tied. But I think we've been doing a lot of coverage on it. I personally been trying to make sure that it stays in the news and that people don't forget about it, because that's how things happen again. You have a regime change in the police department or city hall, and they all say, well, that was the last guy. That's not going to happen on my watch. And they let their guard down, and stuff can happen again. So I think it's important that they own it, learn from it, and don't forget it.
Got you. So I look at one of the things that you spoke on was the very, 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 very popular local DVD that ended up going worldwide, which was Stop Snitching. Even though you said stop fucking snitching, and I was laughing at that because I never knew, that was never the title that I knew of. You put the fucking in the middle, which is all good. You feel me?
I think that's what it was really called, but they changed it for, when it had to go in the family newspaper. Yeah.
No, we have you ever seen the original DVD cover?
Yeah.
I got it ain't no fucking on there, it's just Stop Snitching. But either way, I love that you touched that. If you're right, I owe you. I'm treat you to a beer or something. But I love how you spoke about that, and the Stop Snitching. The reason why is our community lives by this code of no snitching, stop snitching, but it's looked upon and frowned upon by everybody on the outside, even down to police officers, as being the worst code in the world. Me personally, I'm not saying it's a good code or a bad code. I'm just saying, giving my sides of it. So it's looked at as being the worst thing in the world. Oh, stop snitching. Nothing happens. Nothing gets taken care of. But police officers live by this same code of conduct.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, and so, yeah, one of the things that's interesting about the Stop Snitching video is that they say they're not talking about everybody. They're not talking about someone calling the police on someone who killed their son or something. They're saying that, like, people who are in the game shouldn't be giving up other people, who are doing it with them in order to get, like, a lighter sentence, that you should have a code of honor among your, fellow people who are doing this stuff. I think that's what they tried to say it was really about. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's, coming forward and being a witness, no matter what the issue is it's a very difficult thing. And I think we hear a lot about why won't people come forward? And it's like, because coming forward is hard. It's dangerous. There's retaliation. It's not, I mean, who wants to go into witness protection? Who wants to relocate either across the city or to another state? I mean, it's a lot that comes with that. And it does get oversimplified into, like, how come people won't cooperate? It's not that simple. Similarly, with the police department, definitely there's an issue of officers who don't want to tell on their own. And even those who do, there's a character in the book, Ryan Gwynn, who suspects that the officers he's working with are up to something, and he goes forward, but he doesn't have proof. And he all of a sudden feels exposed. He feels like, oh my gosh, I went forward and told on these guys, but, like, nothing happened to them, and I got to see them. I got to still work with them, and, made him uncomfortable. And he would have nightmares about it. So, I mean, it's definitely an issue that gets oversimplified.
I totally agree.